Gallo, seconded by Mr. De Silva. Agenda questions. Please limit your questions at this time to resolutions under new business on this agenda. As a matter of fairness, you are asked to limit your questions to no more than one and your remarks to no longer than 3 minutes. If you are here representing a group, please identify yourself, the group, and your position in the group. If you are here as an individual, please give us your name and address. This section of public participation will be limited to 15 minutes. Please specify the resolution you are referring to in your question.
Creative monster.
John Feason, 20 Falcon Court. Mount Laurel 2, 1 and 2. I get the feeling that we're heading toward Mount Laurel 3, if I read the papers correctly. Last time I was here, you said you had things under control. Are we the same way for Mount Laurel 3 coming? Because Mount Laurel 1 and 2 changed the town dramatically.
Right, yeah.
From 14,000 to 26,000. And everything changed. So, is it on your, it has to be on your radar screen.
Right, it's on our radar screen. We have no control over it. The people that really control that would be, or we have to really speak to as a town council, because we really have no control over that. I don't know if anyone else has anything else that they'd like to add to this.
Actually, it's the courts that control it.
Well, the courts
Right,
control
the
it,
courts
right.
control it, but we're the recipients of their decisions.
Right.
The numbers that we're looking at this time are nowhere near what we saw for the first 2 rounds. So
500 to 1,000.
that's what we're hearing.
Close to 1,000.
Let's see. But regardless, it wouldn't have nearly the effect that we had last time. There are also a bunch of variables in whatever the number that comes up with between part of that housing being dedicated for seniors, part of that being dedicated for special needs, which obviously will have different effects on
My wife considers me a special needs student. So I get 3 points.
You have a place to go.
I read mine.
That's right. So until we know what the number is and what the constitution, what the mix of those units are going to be, it's kind of tough for us to plan. But you know, looking at our facilities where we're at, I mean, there are some things we can do with redistricting. We have some schools, some buildings that have some capacity. So we're pretty comfortable with what we're hearing right now, with where we're at. But obviously, that stuff can all change.
That's comforting to hear because, you know, in the latest Mahwah Matters, Mayor Laforet says, hey, we have everything. We have great schools, low taxes, and safety. Safety is a little not so good anymore. If you go to the town council meeting, it's heartbreaking to hear a grandmother say she's not going to any Mahwah Park anymore with her grandchildren because of the overwhelming of the parks by a group up in Rockland County. So,
one of the other things that we have our eye on there a while ago was proposed down in the middle of town, what they call a pilot program. So which means payment in lieu of taxes. And the way something like that works is a developer comes in, makes a payment to the township for whatever, for roads, it can be used for whatever, but for that payment they get whatever term is negotiated. They don't have to pay a portion of property tax on that building, and typically that's the school tax.
Right.
So that's something that we're looking, something like that, obviously, that could, you know, depending on the new residents that go in there, if there are a lot of children there and the developer doesn't have to pay tax on that money, that's something that, you know, obviously can be an issue for us. We're also looking at, for instance, the Jaguar Land Rover building on MacArthur Boulevard over here, which was, you know, they were a big rateable.
right.
Depending on who goes in there, if there's an entity that goes in there that is tax exempt, that would have an issue. So there are a lot of moving parts to, you know, to what's going on in town. Obviously, some of that affects the school board more than others, but it is we have our fingers where they need to be to sort of, you know, keep the pulse. Hopefully, I feel pretty confident about that.
Good.
Thank you.
On a personal note, you are now my new best friend. Kim asked me today, how am I doing? And I said, good, but I'm really doing great. Because just a couple days ago, I found an old jigsaw puzzle in my basement. And I laid out all the pieces on the dining room table one night, turned them all face up. And the next day, I spent all day doing the puzzle. It's amazing. I had all these pieces, and I did all the puzzle in one day. And I felt great. And I even felt better because on the box top that the puzzle came in, it said 2 to 4 years.
You did it all in one day.
I did it in one day. And I said to my wife, I'm a savant. And she said, no, that's not the correct term. You're an idiot savant.
So your wife went out and got 1,000 pieces from that.
No, it had 20 pieces. I've got to skedaddle. Good to see you again.
Thank
Come in.
you. Thank you. Do you have any other agenda questions or issues? Okay. Dr. Schoen.
Yes.
Report for us this evening.
I do. I have 3 things this evening, if I may. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. The first is, as you all know, and if you don't, we had a colleague of ours pass away on September 29th. James Toronto had worked at the middle school for over 24 years as a physical education / health teacher. He was dedicated, loved. He was a friend, a colleague, a father, a husband. He was a lot of things to a lot of people. And if you would be kind enough to indulge me, perhaps a moment of remembrance for a colleague who dedicated a lot of his life to us. Thank you very much. 2 other reports this evening, if I may. The first is I included in your board packet a Quality Single Accountability Continuum, otherwise known as QSAC, Statement of Assurance. And what QSAC does, it used to be called monitoring in the old ages, right? But now it is a system that the county uses and the state uses to monitor the effectiveness of school districts in 5 areas. Those 5 areas are called District Performance Review, and they include instruction and program, fiscal management, governance, personnel and operations. One of the things that we have to do every year is sit as an administrative team and fill out our statement of assurance based on the areas that we each take care of. For example, Kyle will oversee governance, and Christine the instructional program, and the personnel. Dennis, you're getting the idea of our separate areas. We make sure that we have policies and practice that are in place that the county says we must have, and we score ourselves. Last year we scored 100% in 4 categories and scored 90% in 1 category because we missed a deadline by a couple of days for the submission of the NCLB. However, this year I am very pleased to report that we scored 100% in all 5 areas. And that is pretty amazing because it means in all different areas of our district we're doing exactly what the county wants us to do in the fashion they want us to do it in. So right now we submit our statement of assurance and the county takes a look at it and they determine whether or not that's good enough to go and we can be waived for an on-site QSAC assessment, or they come in. So the county will come in, they will spend a day or 2 with us and all of us in our different areas. They will audit our files, they will look at curriculum, they'll look at personnel records, they'll look at all different things. We tend to get waived because we do a super job in all those areas and they'd like to focus their efforts on those districts that don't do as well in those areas so that they can do better. So they'll spend time there, but that doesn't mean that our time may come up. And if it does, we truly believe that we are ready and we are in very good shape, and I say that based on the fact that we have scored ourselves 100% in all those areas. And it doesn't help us to score higher than we are, because if we are QSAC and we turn around and get 70%, you're going to say, but if you were 70%, why didn't you score yourself 70% and just get better at what it is that you're doing? So we're confident that if we are put to that process, that we will continually score well. So I wanted to tell you about that. The third piece, sorry for the lengthy report, but the third piece is we must report publicly our graduation results by pathway. And I'll explain to you what that meant. We just got those results recently, otherwise they would have been included in that testing presentation we've done in 2017. So I sent home to you all a chart that broke down all of the high school students in our district, right, who tested and how they graduated. I'm just going to give the overarching. 143 students for the 2016-17 school year graduated through Park assessments with a passing score on both ELA and math. There were 60 students who graduated through a substitute competency test for ELA or math, and a substitute competency test includes the SAT, the ACT, the PSAT, or the ASVAB, which is the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. So some kids took that, in our case 60. 2 students graduated through alternative requirements specified in their IEP. So their IEP says they don't need to take Park, they need to take thus and so. In our case, it's typically the dynamic learning math assessment. Those were 2 students. 45 students graduated through multiple pathways. And what that means is, let's say we had a student who passed the Park ELA but did not pass the Park math, they could have passed the SAT math to graduate, or vice versa. So when they talk about pathways, it's not just one piece, it can be a number of different things we can use to graduate our students. That is my report for the evening in regard to pathways.
Good question. Have we ever had PSAC on-site audits?
Yes.
How recently ago?
Every district, they used to do it every couple of years, and they did it every 3 years, then they moved it to every 5 years. And then they started the waiver process, and part of the reason for that is that you only have one county superintendent and 1 or 2 educational specialists who must spend 1 to 2 to 3 days depending on the size of the district. It became so cumbersome they couldn't do their entire job, so they decided, listen, why are we going in and looking at every single piece of paper in every single district for those districts that are high performing? We have maintained a high performing status, so they haven't come by us. Doesn't mean they might not pull us out of the hat, and it could happen, and we're good to go with that, and we like them very much. But that's part of the reason that they started backing away, and the reason that we haven't had it so much is because we've maintained a high performance school.
So our last onsite might have been 5, 10 years
It was
ago.
before my time.
Yeah, it was a long
It
time
was,
ago.
and it's very disruptive to the district, because you're busy gathering all those pieces of paper they require.
You're gathering all sorts of pieces of paper, and you're also making sure that your schools are absolutely 100% compliance. Thank you, I was looking for that word, compliance for facilities. So they're all different things that are on that checklist, which means we send out our staff to make sure that every room, and the other thing is that you never know where they're going. So they may just go to the high school, but you need to make sure that all 6 buildings are exactly where they need to go. For example, right, one of the CUSAC pieces says that you can't have anything hanging from the ceilings. Those of you who have been in elementary buildings know.
Those are best classrooms.
And you're in the
Those are
best
best.
classrooms, you can hit all of those things. That's one of the things that we've had. Our kids love it and we enjoy. You can't have that when you're being monitored to that extent. So I guess in that case, we're not 100%. I'm clearly telling you that. But my point is that there are areas like that of things that we would need to clean up a little bit to make sure that we were good to go. So, and every elementary school has things hanging, by the way. It's not just Mahwah. But there are other things.
Thank you.
So it does take up a lot of personnel time. That's it, Kim,
Okay,
thanks.
thank you very much. Kyle, do you have anything for us
No
this
report this
evening?
evening.
Okay. Mr. Bear?
The first piece, I just want to go off of something that Lauren shared about the passing of Jim Toronto. I wanted to publicly thank the Rampo Ridge teachers, their support for each other, and even the day after the funeral, the teachers at the high school all baked food for the Ridge. It was really nice. No one knew that they were going to be doing it, and it was heartwarming. It was, I mean, that's what Mahwah was all about. So I want to publicly thank all of those teachers.
You're right.
It was really tough for all of us, and you know, that whole family piece is what's important here. So I just want to highlight that.
Thank you, guys.
The second piece is Joanne Barnard, our school guidance counselor over at the high school. She's going to be retiring in December, so she just announced her retirement. I spoke to Mr. Gliata, her supervisor, yesterday, and he highlighted that the quality that is most evident in Mrs. Barnard is her dedication to the students and her caseload. She is a counselor who has fostered strong relationships with her students and is always the student's biggest advocate. She's someone who will go to bat for her students. Particularly, Mrs. Barnard is extremely knowledgeable and experienced in the college application process and helps her students select schools that are an appropriate fit for them. We wish her the best of luck in her retirement.
Excellent.
That's all I have.
I really have nothing this evening. I just want to piggyback on what you said about Mr. Toronto and being at the funeral, and I spoke to his wife, and she told me how very touched she was at the outpouring from Mahwah. And so it made me feel very proud. And
We're all very proud.
yeah.
There were over 30
Yes.
teachers that attended his funeral that day.
And she appreciated it. So thank you all. Board committee reports. Do you have any board committee reports this evening? Yes.
Policy has a first reading, the policy 8550, unpaid meal charges, outstanding food service charges. This was a mandated policy that was approved by the board in July, but is now being revised to delete the requirement that principals have to meet with parents each time their account is in arrears, which is not, which we found is not mandated.
My question to you is, where does it end where the person has to bring the money in? It seems to be it never ending, it ends up at child's welfare. That's it?
What do you mean?
Well,
Child's welfare, what do you mean by that?
according to the
Social
way the,
services.
yes, when it was, the way it was written, they're not looking for money in the end, they're looking for the welfare of the child. It sounds silly to say this, but I don't know, I don't understand it.
We receive reports every week, and the principals receive reports every week as to those accounts that are beginning to get to $5, 0, and then parents will also begin to receive emails once their account goes into owing money. I think it starts at
Arrears.
$20, the arrears or so, when it does. So the principals are monitoring what's going on, and they are interested at the end of the day, certainly in collecting money. It's a business, but there are kids that we want to make sure that if their parents just can't afford to give them money for lunch, that we're looking into ways in which we can help them. We have free and reduced lunch. We have different avenues that we can help kids. So the principals are keeping an eye on that. The piece we're removing, Pete, is the piece that required principals to meet with those people whose account were in the rears, and we're finding that could be 100 and 150. We can't necessarily take up a principal's time meeting with 150 parents. We can figure out another way to do that. So we wanted to remove it from the policy.
You know, my concern that we become overly reactive to this, and we end up having frivolous lawsuits brought to us because we acted in haste.
The only, I hear what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying. I think what it would be is we would know enough, I think, about the family and what's going on to have a conversation. We wouldn't look to put something in writing saying, hey, listen, now as a result of the fact that you owe $25 to a food service company, you have to do thus and so. I think it would be done as typically with us in a very sensitive manner.
And board member remarks, additional comments on reports or other non-agenda items? Yes, Mr.
I tried to go back this week and look at some previous board packets, and I was blocked for some reason. There's a problem with the servers, I kept getting error messages. So would you ask Carlos to check on that for me?
Absolutely. You're the first report to me. I haven't heard
Yeah.
any.
And to the superintendent, thank you, and you know why I'm doing it publicly, but thank you.
Okay, old business. May I have a motion to proceed? Mr. Wondrikowitz, second by Mr. Gallo. Any questions, comments on the old business? Okay. Okay, roll call, please.
Dr. Morphy,
Abstain.
Mr. Wendrikowitz.
Yes.
Mr. De Silva,
Yes.
Mr. Denise,
Yes.
Mr. Gallo,
Yes.
Mr. Kaczmarski,
Yes.
Ms. Conoco,
Yes.
and Ms. Barron.
Yes. Okay, now I'd like to take new business, A through double D, DD. May I have a motion to proceed on that? Mr. Wondrikowitz, second by Mr. Denise. Any questions, comments, concerns? Any of those items? Good to go? Okay, take roll call, please.
Of course. Dr. Morphy,
Yes.
Mr. Wendrikowitz.
Yes.
Mr. De Silva,
Yes.
Mr. Denise,
Yes.
Mr. Gallo,
Yes.
Mr. Kaczmarski,
Yes.
Ms. Conoco,
Yes.
and Ms. Barron.
Yes. Now I'd like to take new business, A through.
Could I ask you, we take the retirement separately, please?
Do that, right? Okay. So we're going to take A separately. I have a motion to proceed on that. Mr. Wondrikowitz, second by Mr. Denise. Comments? Anyone? Okay.
Dr. Morphy,
Yes?
Mr. Wendrikowitz.
Yes.
Mr. De Silva,
Yes.
Mr. Denise,
Yes.
Mr. Gallo,
Yes.
Mr. Kesmarsky. Yes. Ms. Conoco,
Yes.
and Ms. Barron.
Yes. Okay, now I'd like to take 16B through N. I have a motion to proceed on that. Mr. Kazmarsky. Seconded by Ms. Monaco. Okay.
Question.
Questions?
UPS mentors, can somebody elaborate on that?
The mentors from the United States Postal Service?
Yes.
They're from UPS.
Yeah, they sit with our,
They're
students with
Parcel service.
as, I'm sorry, as the,
You did USPS.
mentors with the high school students during that lunch period.
And doing it for a long period of time.
Yeah, years.
Anything else?
It's sort of like a buddy program, and they introduce sort of what they're doing in their job, and they sort of become friends with the students that they're mentoring with.
And they're from the,
They're from the
Mahwah
data center,
Postal?
from the data center at UPS on MacArthur.
Okay.
Okay. Would you like to do the motion, right?
Yes, we have Mr. Kesmarsky. and Ms. Conoco.
Take a roll call, please.
Dr. Morphy,
Yes.
Mr. Wendrikowitz.
Yes.
Mr. De Silva,
Yes.
Mr. Denise,
Yes.
Mr. Gallo,
Yes.
Mr. Kesmarsky.
Yes.
Ms. Conoco,
Yes.
and Ms. Barron.
Yes. Public questions or comments? This section of public participation will be limited to 15 minutes.
Christine Morandi. I feel like we're on the sports talk shows, first time, long time. For, I think, I'm sorry?
PTA president.
Former. Just a couple quick things that I'm curious about. I noticed in some of the family maternity leave that we stopped, and it may have been a long time ago, I'm sorry, stopped using the employees' names and we went to their employee number. Is there a particular reason?
Just because it's confidential.
But it wasn't always that way.
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't, we moved in that direction.
Okay.
We did the same thing as we do with students.
And the other question was the volunteers on, and school volunteers. The wording looks a little different than it has in the past. It says the volunteers are being approved pending a criminal history review. Is that new?
No, that's only listed when we're waiting for their fingerprints. So they've been fingerprinted,
Okay.
and they won't be in the school building
Until they're cleared.
yeah,
So
until
this
they're
is
cleared.
not like the HSO, you know, the little committee chair that we always had our names put on every year. This is an elevated level of involvement and interaction,
Yes.
presence with the kids.
Yep.
Okay, great.
That's what pending
Thank you.
history, criminal history.
Yeah, I just remember you guys didn't do one on me, so. Not that you need to.
We need to.
That's what you thought.
We let a few slip by.
And then the other thing I wanted to try to understand was, so there's a question floating around if Mahwah pays for busing to private schools, not like special ed private schools, but private religious schools. So Don Bosco, I live 1.9 miles away from Don Bosco, so we wouldn't be eligible for it because I'm not over the 2 miles. But where do I learn about that, or can you tell me here if you don't want to point me somewhere? And the second question is, are there any other expenses, and how would we see what they are if Mahwah funds any religious education? I would like to understand the separation of church and state, and if someone is choosing not to use a public school and to choose using a private school, what are we, how and if we subsidize their choice with taxpayer money for someone to go somewhere else that's not related to any special education or vocational or technical education, purely religious.
I'm gonna have to go back to the second question in a minute because there was a lot of pieces there.
Okay.
As far as the first question,
Busing.
transportation and busing, we apply the same rule that we do for the for our schools. So 2 miles up through grade 5, and then 2.5 miles for the middle school and high school levels. So if you are beyond that, and you are a Mahwah resident, and you're attending a non-public school, you can apply for busing. There is a couple forms that need to be filled out. The B60, the B70, one is done for you with us, one is done through your non-public school. We do verify with that non-public school that you are attending there. Ms. Scatino in the transportation office can give you a lot more information regarding that, but that's the basic process. If we find that busing can be arranged, it is provided. If you're eligible and busing cannot be arranged, then we would offer aid in lieu in that case. And the aid in lieu number is something that is set by the state. So any more?
Is
on
that
first
policy common? Is it mandated? Is it?
Yes.
It's both common and mandated? Or-
It's every district in New Jersey has it
It's
as
mandated.
part of their policy. Yep. And again, that aid in lieu number, the number that we reimburse, is something that is set by the state every year during the budget process.
And what requirements does the school that the children are going to have to, what are the standards of the school that we are busing them to?
That one I can't answer as easily. I haven't been in a situation where I've had to go through that entire process. It's always been already established in the district, so I can't answer to you all the procedures that somebody would have to go through.
If a student is being homeschooled and the distance to the home is beyond 2 miles, do they get bused to the homeschool?
Again, that's a situation I haven't seen before, so I can't answer.
What do you,
She's saying, if that religious school's within 2 miles, do we bus them?
if the
Is that
religious
your
school is
question?
within,
Outside.
is that the question?
That's one of the questions.
If there is a religious school within
Out.
2 miles, do we bus them?
If there is a religious school within 2 miles, do we bus them?
Yes, that's.
If there is a religious school beyond 2 or 2.5 miles, do we pay to bus them? If a student is being homeschooled, maybe I don't homeschool my children, but I send them to Mrs. So-and-so in Fardale, who's 3.5 miles
I don't know the
away,
answer to that one.
and
As far as
they're
the
homeschooled
homeschooling
in a
piece?
group by her, do they get bused there?
Yeah.
And that's sort of related to the question of what is the definition of a school?
Right, and how are we,
So if Mrs. Jones is running the school out of her basement,
Yep,
do we consider that a
Yes.
school?
hence the question regarding legitimacy.
Exactly.
Well, it's accredited, is
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
right, something that's fine, that's why you're saying what standards they have.
yes. So where do I go to get this information, or will you get back to us?
We'll get back.
Yeah, we'll research that one and get back to you.
And
And Jones Catino can reach out as far as that
As
information
far as
is
the
concerned, and what the statute said, yeah.
should I
I would send her a quick
clarify
email.
anything in writing? Okay.
I would just put it in writing, Mr. and send her an email. Kyle will follow up with her in
Yep.
the morning. She can look to see what the statute
Okay.
says in regard to what we are required to do. Rather than us try to figure it out, it's best to hear it from a person who does it all day long.
Okay.
As far as in lieu of, there were a few families, there still probably are, who lived on 202. The buses had difficulty getting down there with their routes and coming back. So what we did was said, we'll give you X amount, I forget what the in lieu fee is.
800 and change?
My daughter gets it, but she takes her kid to school. And they paid money in lieu of a bus ride, because they couldn't get the buses down here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
They're excellent. In light of what's going on.
Brooke Gaslow, 552 Adirondack Court. I was just wondering, as far as the laptops and JK, why they're still not set up in the carts going between the classes? Because I've heard it from the teachers, and when I said something in front of my daughter, she's like, oh, we're gonna have carts in the classroom? Like, she had no clue anything about it. And they've been going to the computer labs.
Dr. Turo went through it and wanted a very, very thoughtful and meaningful rollout to those laptop computers. He just didn't want them showing up in the classroom. And part of the reason for that is that JK teachers, unlike the middle school and high school teachers, have had the opportunity to work with their own personal laptop for some time before they had a classroom of laptops in front of them. So he wanted there to be professional development training at the beginning part of the year, the first 2 days, during the PD day, so that the teachers were very comfortable with the use of that computer and what, more importantly, what they wanted to do with it. I expect those laptops to be rolled out very shortly. So they are there. It's not that we're keeping them hidden. It's that we wanted to make sure that the staff was comfortable before we were asking the staff to do their very best using them with kids. So it is a very thoughtful and purposeful rollout at JK is concerned. So it's not that they aren't ready and set and imaged and good to go and on carts and charged. They are. Our tech team did everything they needed to do. I know that Dr. Turo wanted it to be thoughtful, and I happen to agree with that based on the success of the laptop rollouts at the middle school and the high school level. Okay, does that kind of answer it?
Yep.
Awesome.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, we have a motion to adjourn. Mr. Gallo, second by Dr. Morphy. Meeting